Hi, Sarah.
Salut, Frank.
Salut, Sarah. It's because you speak French, actually, right?
I do, but I'm not as well as you speak English. So
Okay, but you
let's
can
stick
like
with
have
me.
have a conversation in French, I guess. Like,
Oui, je peux m'exprimer en
oh,
français.
okay,
Je comprends
okay,
aussi, mais
okay. That's
ouais.
good to know because we are actually going to meet face to face in Brussels in like Tuesday on Sunday for the Festival des Libertés, where we're going to talk about your book, and I'll join the conversation when we start to move towards the Palestine question, and that's what I wanted to talk. And by the way, I mean the video is not live, so but for people who are watching this and who are in Brussels, the conversation with Sarah is taking place at the Théâtre National at 8 p.m. on Sunday. So I enjoy. You should join us. I think it's going to be a very special moment. So I'm doing these interviews and stuff because I'm very interested in people's journey, in life towards truth, towards knowledge, towards the other, towards the unknown. And anyway, because I've been involved with I don't know what to call it, the Palestine question for so long, people's journey into understanding what's happening there, in a way, interests me even more. And so maybe I'd like to start by asking you about, some kind of a background story of your story with Palestine. How did it evolve?
Well, so I was born in New York in 1958, and I come from an Eastern European Jewish family. And I was raised with this idea that everybody hates the Jews, and the Jews are the most oppressed people on earth. And at one period, that was true. My family emotionally did not, I really believe they did not understand what happened in Palestine. I think they saw Arabs as yet another historical force against the Jews. They did not comprehend that Jews now in the state of Israel had state power, and that this was the first time in Jewish history that this had been true, and that this was a transformation. So, like, for example, in 1967 war, when I was 9, my parents woke us up in the middle of the night. This is in New York City. And they said, there's a war in Israel. Like, they were panicked that this was going to be a repeat of a massacre and all of this kind of thing. So that's how I was raised, with this defensive, distorted view of the state of Israel. And I had a lot of refugee relatives from Eastern Europe who ended up in Israel, many because they could not get visas to the United States, right? So there's this, from the beginning, there was this identification with Israel because our relatives lived there. And this was the reason that if you have family members in Israel, you should support the Israeli state. And that's a very hard thing to grapple with. So I think that for many years, I simply did not grapple with or face the reality of Palestine, because I think there was so much that I would have to undo about what I've been taught, my relationship to my family, what family is supposed to do, and all of this, that something I'm embarrassed and ashamed of now. But not until a very late date did I start to even think about it. And the reason that all changed was not an interior revelation on my part. It was from the exterior world that intervened in my life. So I had written a book on homophobia in the family, and I was invited to Tel Aviv University, to a conference on gay and lesbian studies. And this was in 2009. I wanted to go because I came from a very homophobic Jewish family, and I thought that would be an appropriate place. But a colleague of mine at the university where I taught in New York City, who was a Turkish Jew, said, you can't go, there's a boycott. And I said, what boycott? And she said, well, you should find out. So I thought, okay, I'll find out. So I wrote to 2 people, Naomi Klein and Judith Butler. And I asked them about it, and Naomi Klein never answered me. But Judith Butler answered me within 2 hours. And she sent me all of these links and all of this information. And she sent me information on an organization called Boycott from Within. And this was Israeli professors, Jewish professors, who were supporting the boycott, which I then discovered had come into being in 2005. I had never heard of it before. So, and I can see now that my very first investigations were that I asked Jews. I didn't think to ask Palestinians or Arabs or anybody. I approached it as a Jewish issue, and that shows you how close-minded I was and how much I had completely internalized the frame that I had inherited. So I read everything that Judith sent me, and I realized that I couldn't go, that I would be crossing a picket line. And I had been raised in a pro-labor family, and you don't cross a picket line, and that this was a boycott. And that the boycott was dependent on people like me, that Palestinians asked for the boycott, but internationals had to do the boycott. So I wrote a public letter to this gay and lesbian studies conference saying that I couldn't come because of the boycott. And then I received an email from Omar Barghouti in Ramallah. And he was like, "Oh, Professor Schulman, thank you so much for taking this principled stance." And I thought, oh no, what if he's homophobic? Because there was a history in the United States of people supporting the Cuban Revolution, not realizing that gay people were being put in concentration camps in Cuba. And I had no idea what the situation was for queer people in Palestine. Of course, I knew there were queer people there. There are everywhere. But I thought, oh no, what am I doing? So through some solidarity people, I got a message saying, come to Israel on your own dime, pay for your own ticket, speak at anti-occupation spaces that are not boycottable, and come to Palestine and meet with Omar. So, and they said, Naomi Klein has just done this and it was very beneficial. So not really knowing anything and not understanding anything, I just decided to go with it. And I knew that I was going to make a mistake at every turn, but I just felt like I had to do it. So I went. And the first place I spoke was an anarchist vegan cafe in Tel Aviv that was supported BDS. And then I spoke at the Women's Center in Haifa. And there were people there from Aswat, which is the Palestinian Queer Women's Organization. And that was the first time I met queer Palestinians. So it was arranged that I would go to Ramallah and I would meet with Al-Kaus, who was the queer Palestinian group. And then the next day I would meet with Omar. So I was taken by a group of Jewish anarchists to Bilin, this village where there was a protest every Friday, a Palestinian village. And I know, and it's like everything is new. These are ideas I've never heard. These are people I've never heard of. And I'm a very well-informed person. So it's a complete media blackout in the United States at that point. So it's a small Palestinian village. People are marching around saying, the wall is between us and our olive trees. And I'm marching around. And suddenly the Israeli soldiers come. And I look at them and they look exactly like me. Because if my family had not had a visa to come to the United States, that would have been me. And in America, Jews are usually not soldiers, right? Jews become like teachers and dentists and accountants and things like that. So I'm looking at these people who look exactly like me. And then they start shooting tear gas. And we're not doing anything. And the people, Palestinian people, take out these onions out of their pockets and smell them so that this gas, which makes you think that you're suffocating, doesn't affect them. And all of a sudden, it was like my head spun around. And all of a sudden, my sense of we and who I identified with were not these Jews, but were these Palestinian people. And my whole world changed. And that was the beginning.
Thanks, Sarah. And that's what I think your story, in a way, and the story of many people of Jewish descent is crucial, because you touch on a point that is, if you really want to know what's happening in Palestine nowadays, anyway, you can find everything, right? There's no way a sane person who wants to read and understand what's happening on the ground cannot do it. But then you touch on a very important point, and I read an interview of yours when you talk about the fact that because it would turn your world inside out, it's cognitive dissonance, right? You'd rather not touch this topic because, in a way, deep down you know the truth, but the truth will be such a shock to everything you know and you've built and your family and your relationship that you'd rather avoid it. I recently watched a film called Tantura. I don't know if you've seen this film. It's about, I think it's doing the festivals now. It was at Sundance. It's about the massacre of Tantura in actually on my birthday on the 23rd of May, 1948. I mean, I wasn't born in 48, but I'm born on the 23rd of May. And you have all these really old former Haganah soldiers, women and men, who talk. And it's quite touching as well. They're very old. They sit on a table together. And at one point, one of them starts to say, yeah, of course, we did kill people after the fighting ended. You know, and you've got this woman who says, like, Moshe, like we don't talk about this. And one of them says, yes, it's a lot easier to forget, to continue your life. And maybe I want you to talk about this a little bit more, because he works for, obviously, Israel Palestine, when you're either from Jewish descent or you've been taught that Israel was this like beacon of hope in the Middle East. But it works for many issues, obviously. But maybe I want you to talk about this like you'd rather close your eyes because the truth will be shocking in a way.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's two. So the U.S. government is funding the occupation, and it's the U.S. government, my tax money, that provides military aid to Israel and allows for all of these atrocities. And there's two different forces in the United States that support this. One are Jews who are still pro-Israel, and the other are right-wing Christian Zionists. Now, Jews are a small minority in the United States. It's like 3%. Right-wing Christian Zionists, these are the people who are behind Trump and all of this kind of stuff. They're growing and growing. But as more and more Jews speak up against Zionism and against the occupation and for Palestinian liberation, there's this clash within Judaism, within the Jewish community. And the other side is going to these insane strategies now because they're so desperate, right? So the big thing that they're doing right now is that they're trying to create an official definition of anti-Semitism so that being critical of Zionism makes you anti-Semitic. And organizations like New York, like City University of New York, I mean, huge public organizations with a lot of credibility are adopting this bogus, strange, fantastical definition. And so, I would say my biggest confrontation with this was in my university in New York. I was the faculty advisor to Students for Justice in Palestine at my school. And we had quite a few Palestinian students because 1/3 of the school is Muslim. And I was charged with anti-Semitism by the city university. And I had to get a lawyer and go to a hearing. And this was like the most bizarre thing that ever happened to me. I mean, I'm as, look at me. I'm as Jewish as they come. I have 2 Jewish names, Sarah and Schulman. I mean, I speak Yiddish. It's like, and here I am charged with anti-Semitism The university hired the lawyer who defended Dominique Strauss-Kahn when he raped that African woman. That's who they hired. And I had to go in there, and they had 14 pages of charges against me. And everything fell apart, of course. I was completely exonerated. But it's because they're trying to force a false idea that being for justice and being for fairness is anti-Semitic. And this is how desperate they are, because they have nothing. They have nothing to justify their position. The level of atrocity is so overt. The kinds of murders, the kinds of violence. I mean, it's one thing when the word apartheid was introduced, and once you go there, you see it's apartheid. I mean, there's no doubt. But people had trouble with that as a concept. But you see people being murdered. You see people being bullied. You see children being arrested. You see it every day. So what are they defending? You know, they're defending something that doesn't exist.
That's a very important question, right? Like, what are they defending? And actually talking about the, because you talk about the IHRA definition, Kenneth Stern, the author, wrote this this article, right, in The Guardian in 2019, and the title of the article was, "I drafted the definition of anti-Semitism. Right-wing Jews are weaponizing it." And that's the issue, because this, you know, equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism is also very, very dangerous, isn't it? What do you think?
Everything about it. It's a complete falsity. And also, we're in a time where fascism is on the rise all over the world. Of course, there's also Jewish fascism, which is racist against Arabs. But, you know, white supremacist fascism is anti-Semitic in the United States. And these people they're so insane with their supremacy ideology that they're making it impossible for themselves to even go forward. Because they're clinging to an idea that Jews are superior. This is really their belief. I mean, I have talked to many, many, many Zionists, many who I'm related to, you know, many, for many, many years. And what it really comes down to is there's a feeling that Jews are special, Jews are better, and other people are not as important. And when I ask, like, how can you justify having a country where people have rights that are different based on their religion? How can you justify that? They will elevate their description of who Jews are and denigrate non-Jews. That is where they're coming from. So it's a very delusional, but it's also very much in tune with the global trend towards supremacy ideology.
And also, in a way, equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism means, for people that don't have time to think too much, equating all Jews with Israel, in a way, right? And that's very dangerous, because it could then, you know, anti-Semitic acts all over the world could happen, because, like, hey, you're a Jew, you're pro-Israel, because, you know, they making this equation. And I think this is very,
that's
very
true,
traumatic.
But that's it's less of a crisis than the hypothetical of where it could go is less important than where it is right now, of course. Which is this brutality against Palestinians.
And I also wanted to talk to you, because you talk a lot about the lessons that people should take from the Jewish genocide, also known as the Holocaust or the Shoah. Can you talk to me about this? You know.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, when I was young, I went to Yad Vashem, and it was in an early, which is the memorial to the Holocaust in Israel, and it was in an early incarnation, so it was a little more chaotic. And then when Jim Hubbard and I, my collaborator, went to show a film about the AIDS activist movement in Palestine, we brought it to Palestine, our film. And we went back to visit Yad Vashem, and it was like 30 years later, and it was very tightly controlled. And you're going through, and it gives you this brilliant, you know, very well-researched history of how fascism and anti-Semitism came into being. And then suddenly the conclusion is Zionism. And you're like, no, wait a minute. The conclusion is no nationalism. The conclusion is no racism. The lesson of the Holocaust is no supremacy ideology. And they make this leap that isn't even logical. So that's, and it's also within Israel. I mean, it's a very, when you get into this whole thing, it's so fascinating, right? Because half of the Jews in Israel are of Arab descent. And prior to the founding of the Israeli state, the Arab world was a world of Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Druze. And Jews were an integrated part of the Arab world. When Arab Jews came to Israel through both being rejected and also being attracted, there's a dynamic there. People were told to give up their Arab identities. They stopped speaking Arabic. They changed their names, right? And there's this whole psychological separation from the Arab world. But if Arab Jews saw themselves as part of the Arab world, then Israel-Palestine would be a majority Arab country with European Jews as a minority. So there's a lie and there's a twist where people are understanding themselves in ways that are very distorted and imposed. So there's just so much smoke and mirrors and so much distorted thinking. And that level of insanity itself is not sustainable. What it does to a society. We're seeing it in the United States right now, how crazy everyone is being made by this supremacy thinking and all of these punitive laws that are coming down on people and insane, non-logical approaches that are all about control. And that's what you get when you're constantly lying and positioning yourself as better than another person.
And also what's important to understand, and you really mention this often, is that when you talk about the Palestinians, you're talking about the whole of the Palestinian community. So for you, Palestinian means 11.6 million of people in occupied Palestine, including Gaza, in the camps in Lebanon, but also in the diaspora, because in a way they are victims of what happened to their grandparents or their great-grandparents in 48. And that's also crucial to understand the apartheid analogy, that it's actually a smaller group of people having power over a much larger group of Palestinians. I wanted to talk to you as well, because it's important as activists, to look for change and path to, social justice. First, you talk a lot in your book about social media, and to say that for many years, the only we had, actually, I think Norman Finkelstein wrote a book called Images and Realities about the Palestine issue. Image is what you see in the mainstream media, what you've been fed to, but reality is often very different. And you mentioned that the Gaza war of 2014 was a radical change in this regard. Can you develop a little bit?
Well, so it's a mass murder of civilians by aerial bombing. And yet it was positioned as though Israel, this highly militarized state, was somehow threatened by the people who they were decimating. And this is the trick of the whole, the paradigm of the perpetrator describing themselves as the victim. And we see this everywhere in the world right now, because we're in a right-wing swing. So white people are telling you that they are the victims when you're in a dominant position and you're raised to think that you're better. Anybody making you think about yourself, you describe them as though they're hurting you, they're abusing you, they're attacking you, they're threatening you. But all they're doing is illuminating who you really are. And this is so present in how Israel describes itself in relationship to Palestine.
So how do we create change? Because you also talk about this, that change is actually made by a small group of people most of the time. You don't need a majority to create change. There was actually, and I looked into this, a study at UPenn, who said that the tipping point for large social change was about 25%. So, which means that, and they've studied that from 25, let's say from a group of 10 people, if you have 25% of this group that agree on one idea and put it towards the other people, it can switch the ideas of and the concept for these people very quickly. So, and you talk about this also in regards to the AIDS movement that you were very much a part of. So, how do we reach this 25%? How do we do this or start doing this?
I mean, I think the tipping point is the question that we're all grappling with right now, because we're seeing that globally every year there's more and more support for Palestine. On the ground, people support Palestinian liberation. That is clear. You see it in students. Students for Justice in Palestine is the largest political student organization in the entire American university system. We see, queer people are for Palestine, people of color are for Palestine, and younger people support Palestine. But we don't see the tipping point. We don't see it impacting on the ground. And it's because the minority that is supporting Zionism controls the finances, the US government. Joe Biden is very pro-Israel, and he's pro-military support for Israel, even though there's more and more and more opposition to it. We now have a Palestine caucus in the US Congress. Who thought we would ever have that? So it's a mainstream topic, but the old guard has not let go. And that is the obstacle.
So do you think the youth could be the answer? Because, again, Norman Finkelstein wrote this book showing that young American Jews are less and less, even interested by Israel. So even supporting.
That's true, but it's not only Jews. This is something that's in the hands of everybody. Jews are a small minority. The biggest supporters are the right-wing Christians for religious apocalyptic reasons. And look how much power they have in the United States. They've just taken away abortion rights. I mean, they're so powerful. It's amazing. But nobody knows what the path is that is going to change the paradigm. But building grassroots is all we can do. And as Palestine becomes more and more of a mainstream topic, that will build the grassroots, unless there's a sudden event that changes everything, and that can also happen. But the zeitgeist is out of our hands, unfortunately.
Thanks, Sarah. Very much looking forward, continuing this conversation face to face on Sunday, because I think it's a crucial one to understand. Obviously Palestine, but I think Palestine can be a window into understanding, what's wrong, what's very, very wrong about the world we're living in, but also what can be very, very beautiful, with the solidarity movement and stuff about the same world. So hopefully the beautiful will win against
right.
the horrible.
Thanks,
Sarah.
Okay, see you on Sunday.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Yeah.